and welcome also to the hordes of people that are joining us across the world via the magic of the internet. So welcome to this session today on risk factors. I've got some good news and I've got some bad news. So do you want the good news first or the bad news first? This is a test that we're starting off with. This is mostly for the people in the room. So put your hands, this is a psychological test to see what sort of people you are. So those of you who want the good news first, put your hands up. Excellent. And those who want the bad news first, you lot have been working too long in dementia, haven't you? So there's a lot of bad news around in the last 3 years, and so the bad news has it. So the bad news, I'm afraid, is that this session you will have seen has 5 speakers in it, but it doesn't. It has 3 speakers in it. Unfortunately, and this is just the nature of the times that we're in, 2 of the people were not able to come. But the good news is the best 3 are here. And not only the best 3, they'll be able to talk for longer. They'll be able to share with you the beautiful ideas that they have, the important work that they've been engaged in, for many more minutes. And even more importantly, there really will be a chance for us to take time to have questions on what's going on as well. So please do think about questions. Please do realize that there will be time to ask questions as well. So that's the good news, and that's the bad news. What I'm going to do now is to start the session off. People are going to be speaking for about 13 to 15 minutes, and the first speaker that we have is Kevin Rabiant from France, and he's going to be talking about some really fascinating work that brings together sport and dementia with work with the Table Tennis Federation. I'm really looking forward to seeing, and he was very clear that actually he'd been finding it quite difficult to keep all of the exciting stuff in the 10 minutes that we've given him, so it will be allowed to breathe a little bit more. Obviously, if you play a game of table tennis, you get quite out of breath at the end of it, or I do anyway. So over to you, Kevin, and your talk.
Thank you. Thank you for that kind introduction. So hello everyone, my name is Kevin Rabiant and I'm a neuroscientist and currently occupy the place of Head of Research Department as France Alzheimer and Maladies Apparentées. I would like to start my talk by thanking the organizing staff for the incredible job they're doing so far and leading this event, and for inviting me today to present you one of our actions. And also as a French speaker, I would like to present you my deepest apologies for my accent. As a few may know, sports do an incredible job as keeping people healthy, and as long as we practice it properly, of course. And like the proverb say, a healthy body is a healthy mind, and that's why France Alzheimer has a deep interest in adapted sports for people living with dementia. With that context in mind, I will present you our collaboration with the French Federation of Table Tennis, that I will now call FFTT for simplicity, even if I have a bit more time to, to tell it completely. So, first of all, a few words about our association. France Alzheimer et Maladies Apparentées was created in 1985 and is the only association recognized as public utility in the domain of Alzheimer's and related disease. We are strong of 101 local branches all over the country, including overseas territories, and we have 4 main missions that dictate our action, which are the following. First, raising public and authorities' awareness about dementia, that include our advocacy for a better consideration for people living with dementia and their families, and that's translated into communication campaign through different media, as well as requests to the government. Then the research, of course, is one of our missions. Contributing to the progress of research is very important for us, and we do it through collaboration and grants that can be either related to medical or social sciences. Our main mission in that regard will be our call for projects that support each year's research lab and room researchers with more than 1.2 million euros. Then the training of healthcare professionals, training of volunteers and caregivers to improve the accompaniment of people living with dementia and to help their families during that difficult period. For that, we recently obtained state certificates that highlight the quality of our training. And finally, helping and bringing support to families with specific activities and offers that are designed for them. And in that regard, I will present you today our collaboration with the FFTT. So regarding that collaboration, since 2020, we share our strength in order to promote an adapted sport activity for people living with dementia and their family caregivers. And for that, we created specific sports session in multiple partners clubs. Even if we lack literature about that sport, table tennis is a great activity for people living with dementia. It has several virtues such as socialization, focus, perception of pace, motor coordination, all of which are beneficial for people who practice it. It also stimulates cognition and contributes strengthening the hippocampus, which is the main structure involved in memory and is particularly involved in Alzheimer's disease. All of that information taken together explain our deep interest in table tennis as an adapted sport for the population that we support each day. Thus, our main objectives in this partnership were first to promote table tennis to all public, including people living with dementia and their family caregivers, and also raise awareness to the general public in order to promote inclusivity, which is one of our main objectives as an association. In the second time, we want to develop a close proximity in France between FFTT clubs and our local branches that help favoring a routine which is important for people living with dementia and create a sane and safe activity for them to practice and share with their beloved one. And finally, we want to build a coherent offers that can answer the need and desire of our population regarding adapted sport activities and healthcare. So, how is that partnership work? So if you want to develop that kind of project with our own organization, the master word for that is communication between the two organizations. At first, we met and thought about our common objective, which was helping people living with dementia practicing table tennis in safely manners and, of course, properly. That discussion was alimented with our previous experience that was shared from our local branches and local FFTT clubs to ensure that the demand of our association meets the offers that the FFTT clubs can provide. It appears very early that commitment was needed in order to make all of this project work, and we deeply thank all of the professionals that escort our population during the setup and preparation of several sport workshops. And finally, we have a mutual engagement regarding sciences, since we agreed to evaluate the interest of table tennis as an adapted sport for people with dementia and the caregiver through a scientific study. And I will come back to that specific topic just after a quick quote from our president, Joël Jaouen, regarding that collaboration. Our president says about that partnership that it is fully in line with the fight against the prejudice that affects the families concerned on a daily basis. All of the action implemented will make it possible to enrich the support and well-being of people with Alzheimer's disease and their caregivers, and to move together toward a more inclusive society. So once again, inclusivity is one of our master words of our association. And like I said, it will be a rather short speech, but I'd like to finish with the study that we are currently designing with the collaboration of the FFTT, of course, but also with the City Law of Paris and the NPIS, the Non-Pharmacological Intervention Society. In order to evaluate if the table tennis was indeed interesting for people living with dementia and their family caregivers and what its impact would be on those populations, we are planning to develop a rigorous scientific method with the help of a research team. The main objective will be to evaluate the impacts of table tennis on the well-being from both a physical and psychological perspective on people living with dementia and their family caregivers. We already have close to 20 FFTT clubs interested in participating in that study, and we hope it will allow us to recruit around 200 persons, including people living with dementia and their family caregivers, and that in the whole country. We are planning to start the study in early 2023, and we should be able to foresee the results in 2024. And that's it. That's all I wanted to share with you today. Thank you for your attention. Like I said, short speech.
Questions now from the audience. We have one over here to begin with. I'll check on the computer whether there are any coming in from across the world.
Okay, good.
So,
Great, thank you so much. I had a question specifically since you mentioned that you plan on doing future studies. Now, one of the things with clinical studies in general is something you need to be careful of is selection bias. So I'm wondering, is this something that you're considering that because you're selecting maybe a population or a part of that population that is actually able to be playing ping pong, but what about the part of the population also has Alzheimer's dementia, but at such a stage that they're not able to do the fine motoric movements required anymore for performing actually, like making it a fun game still to play.
Yeah.
So do you have any comments on that? Like, how do you plan in the future, including people that might have issues with playing a more complicated sport?
That's a very interesting question. Thank you for asking it. Effectively, table tennis is a great example for adapted sport because it doesn't require a lot of practice to be able to enjoy it. Even people in wheelchair, we have testimonies from people in wheelchairs that can currently practice it. So it will not smash, and maybe it's not at competitive levels, but they can still enjoy it with their partners. In that regard, and it's something that we want to keep in mind. And since we are an association, we don't want to exclude any patients. So regardless of their stage in the disease, we want to include them. Of course, it will be up to the research team that we are collaborating with it to take that into consideration in order to not creating any bias on that subject. And maybe that will be the main trouble we'll be facing with that study. And we have that in mind, and we are currently working on the protocol to be able to handle that kind of issue.
Thank you for telling us about this fascinating work. I was very interested to hear your comments that table tennis improves the function of the hippocampus. I wondered if you could say a little bit more about that work. Who did, how was that established? Is that is there a lot of research supporting that? Is there strong evidence for that?
Yeah, like I said, the main issue with table tennis is in practice it's greatly favor adapted sport for people with disability or restricted mobility, but there is close to no research, close to no literature about that subject. I do find one study that is very old and is a Japanese one that explore the interest of table tennis for people living with dementia. It was not strictly Alzheimer's disease, but more largely people living with dementia, and they highlight the effects that it has on the hippocampus. Now I cannot enter in more details than that, and that's why, it's my main field of research. I'm very interested about what we can find about that study. There is no online question either. There is no online question either.
And there's no online questions, okay. We do have one more question there.
Did the participants have fun?
Oh yeah, a lot.
Yeah.
In fact, we are planning at the end of the study to organize a huge tournament between Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease-related association. And we invite all of the people, including people without any disabilities, to enjoy as an inclusive, all-inclusive tournament for them to share. And we have great testimonies from both people living with dementia and their caregiver, but also with all the coaches that accompany them in that specific sports session, and we have very great return, and that's why we are excited to make that study and all of that work together.
It's fantastic, and to see people to increase their social engagement, reduce issues around loneliness. I think it's got some fabulous social benefits. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your question.
Thank you very much, Kevin. So fascinating, a fascinating insight is that, and the word that we ended up there with, the fun, I think is absolutely right. I mean, there's something that is, fundamentally the right thing about having expectations that people with dementia can and should and would engage in all of the things they enjoy doing, and that includes sport as well. And I think that there's something about sport and activity that have been so much part of everyone's lives throughout your life, whatever that might be, that actually ensuring that those stay open, you then end up with the possibility of three things happening, don't you? The first is about continuing to do something you love, which is really important. But it's also about social interaction. There's a lot of social interaction that happens in sport. The second is it's about exercise, and exercise is good for you, but it's really good for you if you've got dementia. So the actual exercise element of it is also important. And the third bit is, particularly for making these things open to people who've not tried them before, it's the learning new stuff as well. That sort of challenge is in itself valuable and positive for people with dementia. And the next talk that we have, William Yeates, who's going to be talking, is also talking about sport and a return to sport. So I'm going to hand over to you now, and again we will look at this from a different angle. Sorry.
Thank you very much for that introduction. My name is William Yeates. I'm from Sydney, Australia. After spending my lifetime growing up on the Sydney northern beaches, swimming, surfing and paddling the surfboard, my diagnosis of younger onset Alzheimer's disease in July 2019 now meant that my involvement as a volunteer surf lifesaver was now gone. Where that's important to me is I suppose that everyone has a passion, and my passion just happened to be surf lifesaving. But it was very interesting that I was involved in a clinical trial for over 1 year. By the late 2020, I'd actually reached a point in my life where I actually reconsidered going back to surf lifesaving. Interesting thought, but that's where I was. The only problem in Australia, you have to sit for what they call a proficiency test. And the hardest part of that is a 100-metre run and a 200-metre swim. Doesn't sound much. The running or walking along the beach, in my case, was okay. But when you actually have to do the swim, if you look at what's in here, where that white water is, we call that the surf zone. So depending on the size of the surf, you have to dolphin dive through that. So basically you're just going to go swim forward or dive forward, grab the sand, get up, etc., as you move towards. Once you get past the surf zone, you then have to swim out to a buoy. You've got to turn around and then you've got to come back. Sounds very easy, and I'll be honest, for 30 years of my life, I probably could have done it blindfolded. But this particular time was probably the most difficult thing I'd ever done in my life. For some reason, and I understand why now, I'd lost all perception. I wasn't aware of where I was. I could actually probably have kept swimming out to sea. Thankfully, two people actually swam with me, and we actually got there. But it's not still water swimming, it's actually rough water swimming. So when the waves can be anywhere up to 2 to 6 feet, you've actually got to dive through them. And when you're coming back, you've got rips and you've got currents and everything like that. End result, a hard task. But interesting enough, I actually made it. I passed the test. And I thought, that's a really good thing. But the end result of that, I actually then questioned my own ability. And I think if you are a volunteer surf lifesaver, you're there if the opportunity is. You've got to save someone's life. And I actually thought, well, the way that I'm actually swimming, they actually end up rescuing me. And I thought, well, this is probably not a good thing. So it was interesting. I made a decision then not to walk away from it, but actually to take a different step. That is, I needed to actually improve my swimming. So this presentation is about how I actually went about teaching myself how to swim again, and ultimately that led to me competing in Masters Swimming and Surf Lifesaving. There is a tape for this one. The voiceover? Maybe the voiceover. All right, it's probably not coming out, but what I was trying to show you here is that in the simple act of freestyle, like I understand now that, okay, you're going to move your arms and you're going to move your legs. But what I couldn't do, I couldn't synchronise the two. I can do it now while I'm standing up in front of you. But if I'm in a medium, such as water, which is moving, my centre of gravity, my legs will actually drop. So what I was trying to show you here is that I couldn't kick. And I probably just can start to do it now. And I was teaching myself how to actually do this. That was the whole issue. And in terms of rotation, you've got to be able to, for those people who swim, you realise that you have to sort of stretch out and you've got to turn yourself, you've got to get a streamlined body. All that type of thing, that synchronisation, that coordination, it was gone. That's why I struggled. It was an interesting thing. And when I went to backstroke, which is the next one, and a person who used to compete competitively when I was young, when I first started, I actually nearly drowned. I still remember the time I swam in a pool, backstroke, I got about 5 metres, I couldn't coordinate my arms and my legs. And I simply just sunk. It was the most weirdest experience. And I understand now that with dementia, it's like it has an extra layer. You know what to do, but to get your arms and legs to do that, well, that's a different question. You will get there, but there's a delayed response. And if swimming is about, or competitive swimming is about trying to get from A to B as quick as you can, it ain't going to happen. So this is what this is. Then the next one, I noticed this is me actually in a race. I'm lane 6. My reflex actions were just extraordinary. And people were saying, Bill, do you realise that when you swim, when you're taking off, when you're starting the race, you're last off the block? And I went, oh, okay. Take a picture. So they took a picture and showed me. So in terms of actually trying to deal with all this, I realised that I had to do something. My balance, my coordination, and my reflex actions just simply weren't working. So what I did was that I approached 2 exercise physiologists. Their names are Matt and Luke. And they designed what they referred to as a neurocognitive training program. And basically, it was a set of exercises, which I'm now going to show you on a video, and hopefully that works. These are the different things that they got me to do over a period of 18 months. Is there a sound? Oh, the sound's not coming out. And everything they did, they mimicked to my freestyle how I was actually swimming. So what we're trying to do is that there is a tape there. I wouldn't know what he was saying. I can't help you there. But basically, as we go through it, you can see the name of the exercise, me trying to do it, which is quite funny at times. This is Luke, by the way. He's a really nice bloke. And I might say in most cases you are seeing me after 18 months. This is what I started off with. This is later. And what he designed is that as I got better and better at each exercise, he just simply made it harder for me. And this is me trying to walk with my eyes closed. I'm supposed to walk a straight line, but I didn't quite get there. And as we go through it, you'll see that Luke Range organised a whole series of different exercises. This is about my balance, of course, and you'll see in a minute he makes it a little bit harder for me.
Precise task, like swimming, Bill has to rely on the muscle memory of his legs and focus on the motion of his upper body and controlling his breathing. We then added a foam block to require even more focus from Bill and further draw his attention away from his leg movements whilst focusing on his upper body. Finally, the Turkish get-up exercise forced Bill to dynamically position his body in advantageous positions under an external weight without visually focusing on his body movements, thereby building up his proprioception, coordination and balance.
It was pointed out to me that when I was racing, I was always the last of the block. Obviously, I needed to look at my reaction time and my response to the starting gun.
This exercise aims to improve Bill's reaction time and coordination. By having his back facing me, Bill must quickly process the instruction of left or right in order to turn around and catch the object. This creates a potential for error and instant feedback to be provided objectively. Left. This exercise heavily relies on balance, coordination and proprioception. On one leg, Bill is tasked to balance whilst using the other lower limb to accurately reach for a target, some of which couldn't be seen. This action built Bill's awareness of his body and motor skills with added perturbations and instability of the platform. This exercise really challenges Bill's coordination. He is tasked with quickly unlearning and relearning the sequence he has previously established. As his neural pathways get comfortable, we task Bill with swapping from an alternate to a same leg and arm movement, forcing him to quickly create and access different neural pathways. This is based on the concept of neuroplasticity. Opposite. Got it? Yes. This exercise also challenges Bill to complete opposing movements with his arms and legs whilst maintaining a static posture through his torso, similar to swimming. Good. Well, bring that right hand back with the left leg, that's the way. This exercise is designed to develop Bill's coordination and the accuracy of his overhead arm movements, a requirement for swimming. Bill is having to develop an understanding of where his arms are at all times, like when he's striking the water. And rest it. This exercise aims to develop Bill's hand and eye coordination and reflexes. He is having to time the interval between when the ball is thrown and estimate when and where he must catch it. We then add the extra element with the balance board to challenge Bill to focus on two things at once: stability and balance, and his hand-eye coordination. Oh, I hate that. Gotta try again. The final progression challenges Bill's balance, coordination, and reflexes by constantly alternating items thrown, where they will land, and which arm will be used. This is going to obviously be the challenging one, I think. You're right. Bill cannot control where the ball will be coming from, unlike when throwing it against the wall. Thus, he has a shorter window in which to react.
Yeah, exactly. To work out where it's
Boxing is used to develop Bill's coordination of movement, reflexes, and challenge his brain to store and recall complex sequences. He must reliably remember stance combinations which gradually build in complexity with an increasing number of moves. This challenges his working memory, constantly having to stop, archive, and relearn sequences. Here, Bill is having to keep his upward knee rigid and fixed whilst rotating his torso. It was easy for him to lose focus of where his leg was during the dynamic movement, thus challenging his proprioception and balance. This exercise aims to simulate the freestyle stroke. It requires Bill to keep a streamlined trunk whilst maintaining accurate overhead movements of his arms. Orientated on his stomach, Bill must rely solely on his core to keep his trunk streamlined and stable. This challenges him to not over-rotate without using his legs to stabilize him.
to sort of work out how well this program went for me, I suppose from my perspective, it definitely added to my self-confidence. But that's just my perception. So for me, it was then, okay, how do I actually show this? So I then went into competitive swimming. And what I'm going to show you now is that this is at the Australian National Masters, and these are friends that I've made along the way. And you spoke before about engagement, and I couldn't possibly agree with you more how beneficial that was. Here, what I'm trying to show you here is that I had my pre-training times, and then when I competed in whatever event it was, I compared it to the lowest time, and I got my PB. And what I'm trying to show you here is that there was an improvement. For those people who are in Australia would realise that we had COVID lockdown for 4 months, so I had to stop. But the same trend is now repeated again, which is trying to show you something. So, and by the way too, the guy who won that race, he did it in 34 seconds, I did it in 58, so there's a bit of a difference. This is now another set, freestyle, and you're seeing the same type of trends, pre-training and improvements. In the next one, short course, again, the same type of deal. You're seeing, there's my pre-training, there's my PBs, and as time gets on, I'm actually getting better. Very happy with that. This is probably my favourite, because this is this year. The guy who won this, so I don't forget this time, the guy who won that did it in 1 minute and 6 seconds. So I'm way off the pace. But for me, it's never going to be about a podium finish. It's about, can I actually get better? And from my perspective, that's what I achieved. So I really like this one. Okay, next one. The other way of actually looking at it is that, from my perspective, in 2021, I only competed in 50-metre freestyle and backstroke. This year, I increased it to 100 metres. And I also took on a stroke called butterfly. And they tell me, and I actually agree with it, the hardest actually stroke is actually to do butterfly. But I was able to do it. I didn't do well, but I did it. That's the most important thing. And probably the best part of it, I mentioned before I swim, I also do surf life saving. So I went to the Australian Nationals in a local competition. That was me over on the right-hand side, so you get an idea of how big the board is. In a local event, I came last. It's okay with that. At the Australian that year, I came second last, and there were 61 competitors. 1 year later, same event, different place, but I got 9th in the semi-final. I couldn't believe it, which gave me a ranking of 17th in Australia. From my perspective, very happy. What's next for me? At the moment, when I leave here and go back to Sydney, Australia, I'll start on part 2. Part of it, a big part of that is actually, I can't kneel on the board, I don't have the balance, and I can't turn. So if I want to swim 100 metres, I need to learn how to do that. I have 2 international competitions which are coming up, and I'm going to have a shot at it. I've never done it before, and this is part of what I'm trying to say here, is that the ability to probably have a go at it has given me a different perspective on life, where I can actually be part of a life rather than be limited by my diagnosis. So thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. Absolutely inspiring and not a little tiring in lots of ways. Exhausting, seeing the exercises and knowing that there would be no chance that I could do any of those things. So any questions from the audience? We have lots of questions from the audience. So let's wait for the microphone to come to this lady here, then there, then there. So in the yellow first.
Thank you, Bill. I'm Erica Breuer. I live in Newcastle, Australia. So,
okay.
And I'm an ex-physiotherapist. So, nice to just shout out to the great work that your team did. I think it's wonderful, and also to you. I think one of the nice things about this is seeing that they were your goals that you were working towards, and you worked really hard to achieve them. How has that affected the rest of your life in terms of quality of life and your ability to live in other areas? I mean, you're obviously doing really well in swimming, but I'm interested to know how it's generalized to the rest of your life.
Sure. I think I started off when I first was diagnosed. Like many people, I lost my perspective on life. There was no sense. So I think one of the biggest things I ever did was actually accept my diagnosis. And from that point, I could actually see that I could exert some control over my life. And what this has done for me, I suppose, so I get a little bit sentimental about this, so sorry about that. What this has done for me is actually the reverse, in the sense that, okay, I accept my limitations, quite okay with that. But what it doesn't mean that I can't have a life. And it's not about, as I said before, it's not about a podium finish. It's simply about being involved. A bit like last night, if I might say to everyone, I went to the cruise last night, and that was, to me, was really important. It was really great in the sense that I was there and was accepted, was involved in that, and it was a really good experience. And I took away from it, for example, they had dancing, and honestly I can't dance, and two ladies came up and asked me to dance, and I declined it very well, I hope it was very nicely, but I walked away from it saying to myself, okay, there's a challenge. Next year, well, not next year, in 2 years' time, I'm not going to say no. I'm going to have to go and teach myself how to dance, but that's okay. But that's, to answer your question, I think, is that there are limitations, but you've got to be able to work within your own experience, your own abilities, to come up with a way that you're going to lead your life, if that's it.
Fantastic. And the next one was over there.
Bill, that was absolutely stunning. And I really acknowledge you. It is incredibly inspiring. I have a similar question, and I was wondering if the work that you have done on your physicality and with exercise, has that translated into things like perhaps an improvement in memory, or have you noticed improvements in other areas where previously you had symptoms?
I think, it's a really good question. I don't have any evidence other than simply saying, I think that if there's any changes in your cognitive ability, it's probably associated with a combination of things. I don't think exercise will get you there by itself. As I mentioned before, I think I've been exceptionally lucky to be involved in a clinical trial which worked well for me. That has given me, I suppose, the incentive, the motivation to look at how can I improve my cognitive. And I would look at it and say, look, I'm very big about exercise. I'm very big about eating healthy. It's okay for me to stumble. Last night I stumbled. I had 2 drinks. I don't normally drink. But if the time is right, then why can't I live normally? So to me, there is a whole range of things that you need to do. And exercise is one of them. It's an important part. And you mentioned before about social engagement. I am very big about that. If you feel good about yourself, I actually think it's really helpful to you actually dealing with your dementia.
Now, you know I told you I was going to heckle you. Well, I have to say you've disproven the theory that men actually can do more things than one. They can do more than one thing at a time, and I think you proved that today. So take a bow for all the men in the audience.
I'm not so sure about that, Marie, so thank you.
Thank you. I think we have one more down here in the right.
Hello, I am Emanuela from Brazil, and I am very excited to listen you. It's amazing your experience. I would like to know if in your reality, in your place that you practice this, train this program, the other people that have the same condition have access to the same program, the same possibility to access it, and if you have the opportunity to talk and to talk about it with other people that live with the same condition.
The answer is yes to that. I have my own website, and I'm going to put it on there. Hopefully that's one way of doing it. In my conversations with lots of people, I try to tell them about my journey and the importance of this. And I actually think there's a really good, I have no evidence for it, but I actually think it's really good and it's really important for people who are suffering from falling down and all that type of thing. These type of exercises do well for your balance and coordination. So, and there is stuff out there. I'm not too familiar with it, but I'm more than happy to promote it because I actually believe in it. So.
And we'll just have one more, and that will be, and then we'll need to move on.
Hi, Bill. My name's Leanne. I'm from Dementia Australia. And we're getting ready to pilot a program next month which gives people who are newly diagnosed access to cognitive and functional rehabilitation, which doesn't really occur in Australia particularly often. And the intention of that was that we allow people who have been diagnosed to kind of set themselves up for success, right? And it looks at functional and cognitive rehabilitation separately. What you've just shown us has elevated my ambition for that program to a whole new level, because it combines the two in such an intelligent way. And without putting you on the spot, I'd really love it if you would help us and consult to that program in some way, because I think you've completely shifted my expectation about what might be possible.
Thank you. It would be my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, that's absolutely brilliant. So I think what we've got there is, I think, just the most powerful demonstration of how vital testimony is and how the words of people can change people's minds about what is possible and what isn't possible. But I think also what you presented there is the reason why there absolutely needs to be optimism and hope following a diagnosis of dementia, rather than kind of devastating reactions that take people out of society. I think that there's these false and destructive ideas that people have that nothing can be done, that people with dementia can't do stuff once they're diagnosed, that there's no possibility of improvement. You've disproved that gigantically, that it's not possible to learn new stuff, and you learn new ways of doing all those exercises. And that you can't be out there and involved, and you just really clearly show with your sporting journey, as you put it, just how possible it is, but also how useful it is, I think, not only for yourself, but for all of those other people that you're working with in those mixed groups. And that's similar, I think, to the table tennis there, with the mixed groups for that as well. Okay, we're going to move on now to our final speaker. And we have a talk on sleep and thinking and all of those things, and from UCL. So over to you, Lydia.
Thank you very much. So hi guys, I'm Lydia. I'm from UCL. I did my master's there last year. And I'm going to talk a little bit about repetitive negative thinking and sleep in cognitively intact older adults. So just firstly, some definitions. So repetitive negative thinking, or RNT, as I'm going to refer to it throughout the presentation, is a recurrent thinking process. It's often, focusing on negative content and is very difficult to control. Now, typically, it encompasses brooding, which is a form of rumination, and they're past-directed negative thoughts. And also worry, which are future-directed negative thoughts. And both of these have been associated with adverse outcomes like anxiety and depression, and have been found to be maladaptive. So sleep. We know sleep's vital for general survival and also cognition, things like memory consolidation. And we can assess sleep using lots of different sleep qualities, as you can see on the screen. So sleep quality, for example, is how someone assesses their own sleep. Sleep duration is how long we sleep for. Sleep fragmentation, I'm scared my hair is, sorry. The sleep fragmentation is for how long we wake up during the night. Sleep latency, how long it takes you to fall asleep once you're in bed. And sleep efficiency, which is basically the amount of time you spend asleep divided by the amount of time you spend in bed. And all of these sleep characteristics can be assessed using objective measures, so things like polysomnography, using physiological methods, but also subjectively using self-report questionnaires, for example. And a meta-analysis in 2014 has found that some sleep characteristics are associated with dementia risk. And some of those sleep characteristics here are sleep duration, fragmentation, sleep efficiency, and sleep quality. And it's really important to think about dementia risk, given that we know dementia is so prevalent, there's no cure, so thinking about how to prevent the disease is at the forefront of psychological and medical research. So why is this important, and why are sleep and RNT combined? Why am I talking about them together? Well, both of them have been associated with dementia in different ways. So repetitive negative thinking, an increase in this has been associated with an increase in cognitive decline, but also dementia biomarkers, including amyloid and tau. And there's a hypothesis called the cognitive debt hypothesis that suggests that RNT might actually be the process driving the association between psychological risk factors and dementia. And one psychological risk factor that we know of is sleep. And now sleep has been found to be associated with dementia. I know I mentioned that in my previous slide, but specifically a reduction in sleep duration, efficiency, and quality, and an increase in sleep fragmentation has all been associated with cognitive decline and dementia. But we know that RNT and sleep are actually associated with each other. So an increase in RNT, or repetitive negative thinking, has been associated with poorer quality sleep, a reduction in sleep duration, and also, a increase in sleep latency, so longer time for you to fall asleep. And this has been found particularly in younger populations. So the gap in the research here is among older adults. There's been no research looking at sleep and RNT in older adults that has also looked at both subjective measures of sleep and objective measures. So we're filling this gap by investigating the association between sleep and RNT among older adults, but going further to think about the consistency between objective and subjective measures of sleep, and whether levels of RNT actually influence that association. As previous research in younger populations has found that if you have higher levels of worry and brooding, you're more likely to be less accurate at assessing your sleep. So this study, we used cross-sectional baseline data from the RCT Age Well, which is part of the Medi-Aging European project, and that aims to look at the well-being and mental health of older adults. 134 adults were involved, all over the age of 65, with an average age of 69. You can see from the table there that they're very highly educated, majority female, but also a surprising number with sleep apnea. So sleep apnea was measured using the apnea-hypopnea index, and that basically measures how many times in the night you stop breathing for more than 10 seconds. And this sample had, 97% had at least 5 episodes an hour, which is classified as mild sleep apnea, which is, very high for a population. Worry, so how are we measuring all of the different factors? And so worry was assessed using the Penn State Worry Questionnaire, and brooding was assessed using the brooding subscale of the rumination response scale. Both of these were Likert scales, so asking people to sort of rate statements on a scale of 1 to 5, for example. And higher scores on these measures meant higher levels of worry and brooding. Now, sleep objectively was assessed using polysomnography, so this involved measuring heart rate, breathing, oxygen levels, eye movement, and other aspects. And this was all done in the participant's own bed, so it wasn't in a sleep lab or anything. They took the equipment home and did it in their own bed. Subjective sleep was measured using 2 different measures, the first one being the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index. Now, that assesses their sleep over a month, so they're sort of talking about how they feel their sleep is in general over the past month, which is why this was used for the main analyses when we're looking at RNT and sleep, whether they're associated. But we also used the St. Mary's Hospital Sleep Questionnaire, which only assessed their perception of their sleep for 1 night, but it happened to be the same night that they had polysomnography. So it was used to think more about whether objective and subjective measures are consistent and associated. And again, both of these were assessed using Likert scales, so on scales, and higher scores were indicative of worse quality sleep. So what did we do analysis-wise? So I mentioned earlier, these are some of the characteristics that have been associated with dementia risk in the meta-analysis. So sleep efficiency, duration, fragmentation, and quality were all used as our primary outcomes because of that reason. But when we moved on to thinking about consistency, we looked at sleep efficiency, sleep duration, latency, and fragmentation, as these were the only sleep characteristics measured both subjectively and objectively. And then thinking about whether levels of worry and brooding influence that relationship, we looked at sleep efficiency, duration, and latency. Now, fragmentation wasn't included here just because it wasn't a continuous variable, and we needed them to be continuous in order to create a different score. And yeah, everything was assessed using regressions, and we controlled for appropriate covariates, sleep, apnea, sex, and age. So what did we find? Primary results suggest that worry and brooding, higher levels of these, resulted in lower sleep efficiency. So here you can see the scatter graph for worry and also for brooding. But only worry was associated with objective sleep duration and subjective sleep quality. It's worth noting that higher scores on subjective sleep quality scales were indicative of worse quality sleep. And no associations were found between RNT and sleep fragmentation. So there's just a quick summary of all of the results. And now thinking about the consistency between objective and subjective measures of sleep. We did find associations between some sleep characteristics, so sleep duration, sleep efficiency, and sleep latency. You can see all the effect sizes in the bubbles. But when we looked more deeply at the descriptive stats, we actually found that people were rating their sleep as worse than it actually was. So people were underestimating their sleep duration by 9.6% or 34 minutes. People were underestimating their sleep efficiency by 9.4%. And they were vastly overestimating their sleep latency by 52.6%, equivalent to 23 minutes. So yeah, participants rated their sleep as worse than it was, and again, no association was found between objective and subjective sleep fragmentation. So do levels of RNT influence the relationship between subjective and objective sleep measures? The answer is no. They're all non-significant results here. So you can see worry is on the top row and brooding on the bottom. So we can assume then that levels of RNT do not influence the relationship between subjective and objective sleep measures, and that means that it doesn't influence the ability of older adults to assess their own sleep accurately. So just thinking about some conclusions, firstly thinking about the primary analyses that we did. So RNT was found to be associated with some sleep characteristics which have been associated with dementia risk. And this is supportive of previous research in younger adults. Specifically, we found that sleep efficiency was associated most strongly with both worry and brooding. And this could be due to the fact that sleep efficiency, we know, has been associated with dementia risk. But also, and then worry and brooding have been associated with things like anxiety and depression, which we know are risk factors for dementia. So it would make sense for them to be related. But also sleep efficiency actually captures a number of sleep metrics. So sleep duration, fragmentation, and latency are all included in sleep efficiency. So it might actually be just a really inclusive way of looking at sleep. And then worry was more strongly associated with sleep than brooding. Now that could be due to the fact that worry is more predictive of anxiety and depression. As I mentioned earlier, these are risk factors for dementia. But also the worry questionnaire that we used had 4 times the amount of range of scores. So it might have just meant that, there was more power to detect an effect. Okay, and now thinking about the consistency between objective and subjective measures, we did find associations between a lot of the measures. However, they were weak to moderate. And when we looked more deeply at the descriptive stats, we found that actually people were rating their sleep as worse than it actually was. Now, that could have been due to the polysomnography equipment that they used. Very novel, must be uncomfortable to wear, so that could have been a factor. But also researchers suggested that there's a decrease in accurate time perception with age, and that those with sleep apnea are more likely to underestimate their sleep duration or characteristics like sleep duration. So we know the sample we used were older adults and they were very high in sleep apnea, so this could be some explanation for that result. And then RNT, we concluded, did not affect the consistency between subjective and objective measures. So it didn't influence the ability of older adults to assess their sleep accurately. Now, this contradicts previous research that I mentioned earlier among younger adults. But again, a potential reason for this could be that the sample we used were subclinical. So they didn't have, there wasn't a range of RNT scores, and maybe a wider range of these scores would have improved the chance of an effect having been found. So in summary, we've looked at the relationship between RNT and sleep in older adults, but we've looked at both worry and brooding in RNT and both objective and subjective sleep. So the data set that we used allowed us to do quite an extensive search, sort of analyses on these things. But also we were able to control for things like sleep apnea, age, which was really important. So the next steps really are to think about the relationship or the directionality of the relationship between sleep and RNT. The data that we used, obviously it was cross-sectional, so we cannot make any causal assumptions, but future research on this, looking at the directionality, can then lead to more information around interventions to prevent dementia, just because we know RNT and sleep are both modifiable factors that don't need pharmacological intervention. And that's particularly important given that a lot of older adults, a lot of multiple medications is common in that population. So any opportunity we can find to find non-pharmacological interventions is something to think about. And that is all I have for you. Thank you for listening, and yeah, please feel free to get in touch.
So thank you for that. Absolutely fascinating. A kind of whole undiscovered country, essentially, of sleep and dementia.
Yeah.
Perhaps I could just start off by using my chair's bit just to ask one question.
Go for it.
So, I mean, clearly, in terms of risk factors, you've got a really complex pattern of multiple causation, cause and effect, acting and interacting, particularly with depression, anxiety, and the sleep bits. But one of the things that pointed out that really stands out in this particular sample is that 97% of people had sleep apnea, which is an extremely high level, and that's found on polysomnography, was it?
Yeah.
They really do have those breathing problems.
Yeah.
That must make it, firstly, quite difficult to control for sleep apnea in the group. And secondly, the group, it was cognitively normal as well. So one of the variations that you didn't have that might have affected sleep was cognitive impairment. And those sorts of things, that's taken out of the equation in the group here. I suppose I was wondering if you, I mean, firstly, why you think there was that extraordinarily high percentage of people with sleep apnea, which we know is associated with cognitive impairment and depression and anxiety and all manner of things. So firstly, why that was there, and secondly, whether that might explain some of the differences in findings that you have between younger populations, I suspect, with lower levels of sleep apnea.
Yeah. No, it's a really interesting question, and it is something that stood out to us straight away. It's the amount of people with sleep apnea. The answer to the first question is we don't actually know. But you know, if I can think about my own personal hypothesis, is a lot of people don't know they have sleep apnea. So sleep apnea is very much something that you can live with for a very, very long time and not know that you've got it. So I can imagine a lot of these people didn't know they had sleep apnea when they did the study. So it's something that is very easy to hide. When you're asleep, you're unconscious, so you're not able to assess, am I breathing all the time? So that's, I guess, leading to that. And the second question was about, what was that one? I forgot one.
The second question was about the extent to which the apnea itself might be might affect the difference that you're finding between younger populations, presumably with lower levels of sleep apnea, and these older populations.
It could well be, but I think because we have been able to control for it in this analysis, we can't really.
You can't control for something that's 97% of the population.
Yeah, I mean, statistically we control for it, but not, yes, you're correct. I mean, it's something that I think should be thought about in future research and is maybe a next step for our lab, yeah.
Anyway, I mustn't hog your time. Any questions? There were lots of questions here. Okay, so we'll start off with this one here, since you're there, and then over to the gentleman over there.
I thank you. That's really interesting. I'm Ezra Hassan. I just wanted to ask about, as you were saying, for the next steps in terms of the directionality. Do you sort of have, based on the findings, sort of an idea of sort of which factors may be mediatory within that directional in your findings?
The chances are, it's a great question, I think the chances are that this is a bidirectional relationship, so sleep and RNT are going to be influencing each other. But like I mentioned earlier with the cognitive debt hypothesis, it's actually suggesting that RNT might be the process driving the association between psychological risk factors like sleep and dementia. So that's something to think about. And I know that future research, or research that's happening right now, is looking very specifically at whether RNT is a risk factor for dementia. And again, with sleep, more specifically looking at what types of sleep are risk factors for dementia. So when we have a better idea of that, I think it would be then really important to think more closely about how they interact. And the chances are, I think, that it would be bidirectional.
Thank you.
And that gentleman over there. And then one in the middle. Sorry, we're keeping our helpers running. Obviously, this is the theme of exercise and it being good for you.
I'm sorry, but I wanted to continue the discussion we were having a little bit about the statistical analysis and specifically the mentioning of sleep apnea. And something I wanted to propose as an hypothesis here is that one of the key risk factors for sleep apnea is increased weight, obesity. And as people get older, their metabolism typically slows down, which could be one of the key factors. That is why you don't see in the younger population such high percentages of sleep apnea, but you see in older populations where metabolism will slow down, weight will increase, that you will have increased numbers of sleep apnea. That's something that you might want to consider instead of correcting specifically for sleep apnea. Maybe you would like to correct actually for weight in your population subsample. That's just a comment in general. My question that I actually wanted to ask was, considering there's such large inter-subject variability and inter-subject variability in sleep specifically, and you did your study, of course, with patients in their own comfortable environment, there's a lot of parameters there that you can't control for: room temperature, the diet that they have, the amount of exercise they have before they went to sleep, what kind of activities they went to go for sleep. So how do you think that impacts your statistical analysis? And since you work with more objective measures, with subjective measures, do you think there's value in maybe adding objective measures, like, for example, biomarkers, specifically looking maybe at inflammation as a possible future direction for your study?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your comment before as well. I'm definitely going to take that home with, weight, something to think about. I think you're right. I think that's exactly what the next steps are, to start thinking more biologically about, biomarkers. I know that this cohort didn't gather that much information, or the amount of, like diet and things like that. But we know that subjectively, getting any sort of content subjectively has loads and loads of different factors influencing it. So there's no way we're ever going to be able to maybe control for all of it. But I think that's, some really good points, and I'll definitely think about that. Thank you.
Okay, and there, in the blue, in the middle.
Congratulations for your presentation. I would like to ask two questions. The first one is, have you done qualitative research about the content of repetitive negative thoughts, or from your experience about the content? Because worry is a general word. So it's like thoughts like I'm gonna die, or I'm alone, or something like that. This is the first question. And the second is about the solutions. So it's something like we can teach some relaxation techniques, or cognitive behavioral psychotherapy could be a solution about this issue?
Thank you very much. Yeah, they're great questions. I think for the content of worry, and you're correct, we didn't look at any qualitative data there, so we don't know the content of their worry. We do know some information about it, given that they've rated statements on a questionnaire. For example, I worry about where my next meal is coming from, or the examples of questions like that, they're rating on a scale of 1 to 5. So we could look a bit more deeply at the individual questions that we're asking in that questionnaire. But I think it's really important to think about the content of worry, because a big difference between potentially younger populations and older populations is actually the content of worry. And why we might be seeing such differences between younger and older populations is because the worries are different. The time of life is different, your concerns are different. So yeah, that is something that we need to think about, and future research, I hope, will be covering that. And I'm really bad at remembering second questions. So next time I'll try my best, but just remind me, it was about solutions, yeah. So we know a lot of different interventions for sleep at the moment. And meditation is a huge one of those. You know, part of this project that we're is from the Med-Aging Research Project, which is focusing very much actually on meditation as a solution for sleep difficulties, but also RNT. So that's a big one going forward. But I think before we start thinking about solutions, we need to fully understand the relationship between the two, and whether it actually reduces dementia risk in the first place. But yeah, fantastic ideas. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to check first to see if there are any internet questions, which there are. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's absolutely brilliant.
Thank you.
So there, I told you it was good news that we only had 3 speakers, didn't we? So that's a fantastic set of talks that we've had there. And I suppose in terms of a theme for you to kind of walk away with, the last talk was talking about repetitive negative thinking. And I hope that having heard, you know, the hope and the optimism for change that's in all of these, including the possibilities for doing things in areas that we don't do stuff about like sleep at the moment, but certainly in terms of the, you know, the work with ping pong, the work with improving and learning stuff, that we walk away from this session. I hope you walk away from this session, and I hope you walk away from the whole conference as well with repetitive, positive thinking about dementia and people with dementia and what people with dementia can do. So thank you all for coming very much, and please give another round of applause for all of our speakers.